Well, Catalyst, we are blessed again today to have Dr. Andrew Corbett with us. Dr. Andrew Corbett is from Legana Christian Church in northern Tasmania. He's also on the national leadership team of A2A, and he's the president of ICI Theological Colleges. He holds a number of degrees and is the author of a number of books. And we're blessed today to have Andrew with us, actually, for this whole series, where he'll just be putting in a different perspective, I guess, a biblical perspective on some of the questions that we're facing. So, Andrew, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your time and your effort. Great.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'm going to jump straight in. Our first question for today, Andrew, is this one. If I have doubts about God or my Christian faith, does that mean I don't have faith? What do you think about that?
Carl, I love the question because I think this is a struggle that a lot of particularly younger Christians have got. I think there's a couple of reasons why I would, if I was giving a simple answer, I'd say no, it doesn't mean that at all. And here's why. Firstly, there's a difference between doubt and unbelief. And secondly, there's also a misunderstanding of what faith means. So when we talk about the Christian faith, essentially what we're using faith in a term that means the body of what Christianity teaches. So this is where I think we need to understand what the Bible means by the word faith. In fact, in Hebrew, for a Hebrew mindset, there is no equivalent word in English for the word faith. There is the word faithful or faithfulness. In other words, to the Hebrew, it was reasonable trust that leads to an action. And we see this, of course, in the epistle of James, where he says faith without works is dead. So that's really a Hebraic way of understanding what faith means. The closest we would really come to that in English is the word trust. But again, I'm using this word reasonable trust. So here's where I think we need to understand that sometimes when people say they doubt the Christian faith or they doubt God, it's often grounded in some false assumptions. It's grounded in an idea that faith is just wishful thinking, which is the way it's generally used in our modern English. We hear skeptics and we hear those people who are atheists pit faith against reason, but that's not what the Bible does. The Bible actually says that faith is grounded in evidence, and we find that in Hebrews chapter 11, that it's the evidence of things hoped for. So we have faith in the Bible as grounded in evidence. At the close of John's gospel, he says this: "These things I have written so that you may believe." In other words, here's the reasons for believing. You can verify them, you can check them out. When Paul gives the theology of the biblical teaching on the resurrection of Christ, which, by the way, is one of the 5 classic proofs for the existence of the God of the Bible. And you can find those 5 classic proofs on my website, andrewcorbett.net. If you just Google 5 proofs for God's existence, that'll come up. And you'll see a whole bunch of people who disagree with me, but I'm going to make a point about that in a moment as well. But oftentimes we see that what people say that they're struggling to believe is actually not well grounded in the Bible itself. It's grounded in a notion that Christianity teaches that faith is blind faith. Just trust it. Don't question. And I would say that is not what Christianity teaches at all. In fact, 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says this: "Test all things and hold fast," cling tightly, "to that which is true." Yeah. Interestingly, the verse before it says, "Do not despise prophecy." Now, the reason I'm pointing that out as an interesting link is that oftentimes in the more charismatic Pentecostal circles, there's a subtle message that says it's not about thinking, it's not about evidence, it's not about fact, it's about how you feel when you come to church. And the Apostle Paul links the charismatic experience, "Do not despise prophecy," and then the next verse, "Test all things." Nice. In fact, when you think about it, this is how we come to a knowledge of the truth. So there's some things that I think we as Christians need to do. And in fact, I encourage people to be skeptical. In our church, I say it all the time, I want you to be skeptical.
Mm.
And the reason is that a skeptic is someone who only believes if there's good reasons to believe.
Mm.
Cynical is when no matter what evidence you offer me, I'm not going to believe.
Mm.
That's cynical. We don't want to be cynical. We want to follow the evidence where it leads. So here's a couple of tips in coming to a knowledge of the truth. And I'm thinking of Josh McDowell's son, Sean, who went to his dad. Josh McDowell was one of the world's most famous apologists. And a young Sean McDowell came to his dad and said, "Dad, I'm having doubts about all of this stuff about Christianity."
Mm.
And Josh McDowell said to his son, Sean, "That's great, son. Keep investigating and tell me how you go."
Mm.
And so Sean was surprised. Sean thought his dad would give him this lecture and tell him, scold him and say, "You just got to trust, just got to have blind faith." But he didn't do that at all.
Mm.
In fact, Sean did go and investigate the claims of Christianity, and he became convinced that there's good reasons to believe it. So here's some things that I would suggest to anyone when they're pursuing truth, the truth claims of Christianity. Firstly, assertions are all over the internet. Assertions. In other words, people just say things. But an assertion is not an argument. An argument we sometimes think is, blah, 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 but that's not. An argument is giving your reasons. So an assertion is not an argument. So secondly, a response. So you'll see on that article that I've just mentioned, you'll see some 39 responses or so I just checked before, where they're all going, "Oh, Corbett's an idiot, blah, blah, blah." That's not an argument. So here's the second thing to be aware of. A response is not a rebuttal. So people might be able to respond, but it doesn't mean that they've actually rebutted the case for the God of the Bible. And thirdly, any proof for a truth claim must correspond to the claim. So for example, if I'm going to say, my desk is 1.7 meters wide, I'm not going to use a stopwatch. I'm going to use a tape measure. Christianity is grounded in history, the truth claims of history. And so when the Apostle Paul wrote about the resurrection, as I was about to mention before, he said this: there were 500 eyewitnesses. And then he says this: many of whom are still alive. That's a bold claim if it's not true. In other words, I think if you have doubts, you should pursue those doubts. You should investigate the claims.